Dr. James R. Conner is University Distinguished Professor and Vice Chair of the Department of Neurosurgery at Penn State Hershey Medical Center. He is also Director of the GM Leader Family Laboratory for Alzheimer's Disease Research. In May 2005 and in October 2009, he chaired 2 expert roundtable meetings that brought together leading researchers from around the world in the field of copper and Alzheimer's disease.
There are many uncertainties about Alzheimer's disease, and certainly the role of copper is one of them. At a roundtable meeting that we held recently, it became clear that the copper in the environment, diet, or even in the drinking water is not a risk factor for developing Alzheimer's disease. Dr. Bayer and Dr. Mothop conducted the first double-blind, placebo-controlled human trial on copper in early-stage Alzheimer's disease patients. Through this research that they performed in Germany, they conclusively demonstrated that copper does not cause or even worsen the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease.
You cannot say it's a risk, it's what we've just proven the idea. If add on 8 milligram copper per day over 1 year has any effects on cognitive parameters. And we can really say there is no effect at all.
And from this clinical study we know that there is no beneficial effect after a copper treatment of patients, but there is also no harm of copper treatment of those patients.
I'm alarmed to hear how people are actually trying to avoid copper in terms of trying to avoid Alzheimer's disease. That seems to me too premature to draw that sort of conclusion, and in fact the evidence doesn't suggest that that's the case. So being in the company of experts, I think we've formed a more or less a conclusion that copper plays an essential role in the brain's function, and that to be deficient in it could be very detrimental in terms of your memory function in general, and perhaps will play a role in Alzheimer's disease itself. The amyloid problem in Alzheimer's disease might even exacerbate the lack of bioavailability of essential brain copper.
It can't be emphasized enough that copper is indeed essential for many brain functions. And even today, new functions of copper are still being discovered. Another crucial aspect about copper in the brain is proper balance. A deficiency or an excess of copper in the brain can both have detrimental neurological consequences. We're finding that in Alzheimer's patients, and even in our elderly population in general, copper deficiency is a very important concern.
There's more evidence that copper deficiency occurs in Alzheimer's disease than the likelihood of being exposed to copper causing the disease.
All the evidence that we saw in the last meeting and in this meeting is that in fact there is a deficiency of copper in Alzheimer's, probably that is also supported by the animal models. So there is no reason to think that in fact copper would be involved in Alzheimer's. However, we learned a few things. We learned that copper probably is important for the synaptic function or the general function of the brain, and that is very, very interesting.
I think what's been assembled though over the last few years is a building case that actually it may be low copper as opposed to copper excess that contributes to the progression of this disease. But independent of that, I think what I was found most excited at this meeting was the discussion of the recent clinical data, which suggests that on top of what a person gets in a normal diet, additional copper did not cause any harm, did not give any risks. I think this is reassuring for those of us who are trying to argue that it's copper deficiency we have to worry about. This gives great comfort.
With regard to copper in the brain of the Alzheimer's patients, it's not necessarily a matter of too much or too little copper, but more importantly, whether or not the brain can even access the copper that is present. In the brains of Alzheimer's patients, the copper gets bound up inside these sticky, viscous plaques so that the copper is not really available to the neurons or the brain cells that need it. Neurons need copper to generate the energy to function at their optimal level. So, if there's a deposit of copper sitting next to the neuron, and that neuron cannot get it, then that neuron's actually copper deficient, even though there might be elevated levels of copper in the brain.
Dr. Conner's research and the expert roundtable discussions have helped to illustrate copper's role in healthy brain functioning. They have also established a framework for how the general public should understand the role of this critical micronutrient.
First off, you have to accept the fact this is an essential nutrient. It's really good for you. And second off, if you're going to do something, say, like take a supplement, many national institutions, such as the Institute of Medicine in the United States, recommend that you should have copper in that supplement along with the other micronutrients, so it's balanced, because ultimately that's what your body needs.
Alzheimer's is an extraordinarily complex disease. Based on the data, we've come to the consensus that copper doesn't cause Alzheimer's disease. Indeed, it might even be beneficial. The human and economic toll of Alzheimer's is devastating, so it's imperative that we learn more about what causes it and how it can be successfully treated.